Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of FEI Canada's virtual Interchange Symposium. It's been a great couple of days, interesting content, excellent speakers, and insightful conversations. Many of you may wonder how the program gets developed, the topics that are brought forward at the symposium and the national conferences. Well, it comes from volunteers like you, members who participate on one of our 7 thought leadership committees. Thought leadership begins with FEI Canada's policy forum and its 7 thought leadership committees. Many of the ideas, topics, and panels begin as discussions at one of these committees. These committees are populated by volunteer members like you, our subject matter experts. Joining the committee will help you become a thought leader, building your network, expanding your network of experts, continuing your professional development, and increase your board and committee experience as part of your professional development as a chair or vice chair. Working closely with FEI's program committee and the national office and our events coordinator, shout out to Rita Plaskett, we developed the program and bring this thought leadership for you. The final program does come together, a lot of work behind the scenes to bring you this top shelf business intelligence. Today's final panel on ransomware attacks shares some experiences of a real life attack. What happened? How was it managed? What would you do differently? And lessons learned. I would like to welcome your MC, Georgina Blanas, Executive Director of FEI Canada. Welcome, Georgina.
Good morning, Norm, and thanks so much. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à la conférence FEI Canada. Norm, thank you so much for the introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome all of you here today on day 3 of the final day of FEI Canada's 2021 virtual symposium, Financial Leadership in Challenging Times. Thanks so much, Norm, our chair of the Thought Leadership Forum, for kicking off the proceedings. We have another fantastic showcase this time with FEI Canada's Private Companies Committee with hot topics. But first, before we get there, Norm, could you share a little bit about how we got here today and the tremendous work that the volunteers put together along with the staff to come up with top shelf programming, thought leadership, business intelligence, information and education for our members?
We have, as I mentioned, the 7 thought leadership committees, and just to run through them quickly, and again, always looking for volunteers, people to join. We have, of course, our CCR on Committee on Corporate Reporting. We have a Governance and Risk. Our IT side, Bill Ross, always a champion, bringing forward new ideas. Our chair of our Digital Transformation panel yesterday. Pensions Committee, Tax, Treasury and Capital Markets, and of course, our new Private Companies Committee. And what we do is each committee meets monthly and goes through different topics that they want to present. As an example, what some of the committees do, they'll brainstorm with their members. What is of interest to them? What is new in the market? What do we need to know? What can we share with our other members? And these committees sort of boil up 2 to 3 ideas that come forward. And then at the policy forum, we sort of debate which ones are sort of relevant for the time and might fit quite nicely into our next symposium or national conference. So the chairs of those committees, along with those members, really build the ideas and bring these topics forward to us. And then, of course, working with the program committee, who helps coordinate this as well, they have their input and take those ideas forward, and then recommend those to committee. Today, with the symposium, we have the 3 that came forward, again, in the future of work, the digital transformation, and today the ransomware attacks.
Thank you, Norm. That's an extreme informative piece and a collaborative piece with all members coming today to kick off today's proceedings, the programming, to provide very timely information and business intelligence for our members. Especially today with our recently launched FEI Canada's Private Companies Committee, coming out of the Thought Leadership Forum. It's really presented a glowing participation level and enthusiasm where everyone's rolled up their sleeves and really come together. Now, following the showcase will be the hotly anticipated ransomware, as you said. And now, to kick things off this morning, I'll now hand it over to Dr. Howard Johnson, who's also a leader as part of our Thought Leadership Forum. Howard Johnson is the Managing Director and Canada's market leader at Duff Phelps and Chair of Private Companies. I want to thank Norm, who joined us. And I'd like to say good morning, Howard, and hand it over to you.
Thank you everybody for your time today. Want to keep this fairly high level so we can keep things on track. But as Rita was mentioning earlier, the new Private Companies Committee has recently been launched, really aimed at the essence that a lot of our members are CFOs of privately held businesses, owner-managed businesses, sometimes family businesses, and sometimes those individuals are tasked with something that's a little out of the ordinary. And where do they go to for help, right? They don't have necessarily somebody within their organization, so they have to look outside. So if we just flip over to the next slide, really the essence here, if we go to that next slide, whoever's, yeah, perfect. So this is something that's unique for FEI members, and the objective is it's going to reinforce the value of your membership. It's also going to help ideally attract new members, but at its essence, it's designed to be a safe haven to reach out with peers so that you can talk to people on a confidential basis. If you're going through an issue like the divestiture of your business, or you need to have a candid conversation with your bank because you're going to breach covenants, etc. Where do you go? You can talk to somebody who, they're not going to solve all your problems. They're not going to spend 3 days on it, but they can help you get down the right path so that you can be a better CFO and make better decisions. So today we have over 30 people among the various committees that have signed up that are prepared to give their time and their expertise. And it's into 4 groups. And if we just go to the next slide. There we are. There's the 4 of us. So I head up the private company merger and acquisition group, given that it's my day-to-day job. But Jeff Resnick out in Edmonton is the vice chair. We have 11 members there. We have Jeff Schickley, who heads up the multi-generation family businesses. So the issues that oftentimes come up with family succession and so on, family offices. We have John Forrester, who's looking at private company finance. So things like how do you talk to your bank, and Stephen Sloan-White is from Atlantic Canada, helps in there. And Ross Campbell from the Golden Triangle chapter, is really looking at entrepreneur successions, things like management buyouts and so on. Amanda Vella out of Edmonton is helping him. So, we are blessed with having a bunch of, very dedicated volunteers that are prepared to provide their expertise in each of these realms to help various members. So, just moving quickly over to the next slide. So the questions that might come up, for example, you might say, look, I'm going through a divestiture process. How do I, what should go into a letter of intent? I haven't done this before. What should go into it? What shouldn't go into it? That would come under my venue, or what happens in integration, et cetera. It may be with John Forrester's group, and to say, how do I make sure my company is properly financed? How do I talk to my bank? It might be Jeff Shickley's group on multi-generation businesses. Like, we've got a family office that's involved. How do we control them? What are the expectations? What are their mandates should be? Right, entrepreneur successions. So there's a management buyout opportunity. Maybe Ross Campbell's group can help in that. So these are the types of questions that many members have because they just haven't been in a situation before, and it helps to talk to somebody who has been through some of this. So, just moving along, one of the things that we do have coming up, you mark your calendars on November the 18th, we are having a roundtable focus first of all on the merger and acquisition group. So myself and my colleagues within the merger and acquisition subcommittee, will address a whole bunch of questions that business executives, CFOs oftentimes run into when they're doing the acquisition side. Things like the integration challenges. How do you assess culture? And on the divestiture side, negotiation and structuring and process, all these things that become important, and just to have that round table forum. But in addition to that, just moving to the next slide, what we have is, and this is where we hope that a lot of FEI members will get a lot of a lot of bang for the buck for, is the newly developed website. So this is still a work in progress, but the newly developed website that's come on board is one that you can go to and really helps you to pinpoint who might be able to help you. So on there are the bios of the 30 individuals. So you might pick and choose the 1 or 2 individuals that you think are best aligned with what you need based on their expertise or their experience and so on. And importantly, there will be resources placed on there on things like selling businesses, buying businesses, financing companies, be they videos, be they books, or whatever you might need in order to solidify your knowledge within a key subject area. So we're quite excited about this. It is in its infancy today, but this thing is going to grow very quickly. And so, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to the main screen. We just want to recognize that we have secured a major sponsor called Targeted Strategies that focuses on the creative life insurance space. They've been very generous in helping the private company committee get started, and we hope that members, if you do have a need for this, will consider their offering as part of your mandate. So with that, Georgina, let me turn it back over to you and the main event. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks so much. Just one question, and it's come up often enough with the tremendous volunteers that have joined the Thought Leadership Forum and also the Private Company Committee. With your help, Norm Ferguson, co-chair, Bill Ross as well, and all the other tremendous volunteers. And it keeps coming up often and often enough. Can you talk a little bit and share with the members that are with us today who are looking to participate? One, how can they get involved? And two, the real value that's really been expressed, in particular by our members getting involved, and also the value that we bring to our sponsors.
Yeah, so just addressing that, those series of questions. Anybody that's interested in being involved in one of the committees, please go on the website and reach out to the chair of the committee where you are most interested in, and you think you can, you have something to offer. You don't need to be an expert in a certain field. Just have some relevant knowledge, experience, a desire to learn. But it is important, and what we're trying to ensure is that anybody that joins a committee is committed to it. There are monthly meetings, at least 10 meetings a year. We take the summer off and Christmas off and so on. But it's expected that people will be there for most of the meetings. I mean, we're all busy, right? We all have lives and jobs and everything else. So it does take a bit of a commitment, but it's an opportunity to work within a niche group, to enforce your own understanding and to contribute to other members. And it is very rewarding. I mean, FEI is the type of organization that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I found members over my 20 years with FEI to be very helpful. They'll give you time, they'll give you help, or importantly, they will point you in the right direction. So nobody expects you're going to spend 3 or 4 hours if somebody has a question, but just even 5 minutes of saying, look, here's what I did, and that didn't work, and I tried that, and I talked to that person, that did work, so go talk to them. As you know, that can be worth a fortune. And of course, we do work closely with our sponsors. They do help us, and we do encourage members to consider their services and their offerings. It might not be the right choice for you, but we do want to recognize that they are an important element that really helps FEI to continue to grow and prosper. We want to build an organization of at least 2,000 people in Canada, 2,000 good quality senior financial executives, and with initiatives like the Private Company Committee and sponsors like the Targeted Group, we think we're on good footing to get there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard Johnson, for that excellent showcase. and the value and the tremendous efforts and participation that you and all the volunteers put forward to bring financial leadership at the forefront for our country and for the companies and commerce that you represent. You've certainly given us a lot to think about and also to consider. And I'd welcome everyone to participate, join the Thought Leadership Forum, join the Private Company Committee and in particular areas, and find the value that you are provided with in your day-to-day membership. So thank you so much again for that presentation. Now, before we move to today's panel discussion, ransomware attacks, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping notes. We ask that you please stay muted throughout the presentation. There will be plenty of time for a dedicated question and answer session with the panel. Please enter your questions. Please raise your virtual hand, and under that icon, there is a little hand that you can click on in the reactions tab on Zoom. You'll then be called upon to unmute your mic and ask your question. After the question, please mute yourself again so we can hear the next question. Now, on to our session, ransom attacks. In this session, our panel will discuss what is your role as a finance executive in managing thorough and recovering from a ransom attack. So getting you through it and also recovering. Hopefully you'll never have to get there, but in case you do, there's a lot of information here and we have a great lineup of speakers. Now, you're going to listen to some real-time experiences and they're going to walk you through steps to help you and your organization be more prepared. Our moderator for today's session is FEI Canada's Sponsorship Manager, Brad McCabe. Welcome, Brad. And Brad has over 20 years of experience with working with attractions, events, not-for-profits. Brad applies his sponsorship and brand activation knowledge to serve an array of brands, events, and causes. Brad also supports FEI's Canada's partnership program, and thank you very much to all our partners and our sponsors. Brad aims to solve a common issue found in the industry, cutting through the noise to find the right sponsorship to deliver strategic objectives. Brad has been an integral part in leading organizations through transformative changes in structure, engagement, and revenue development. To begin the conversation, I'll now pass it over to today's moderator, Brad. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, Georgina. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining the conversation today. It should be really engaging. I know in the prep calls, there was a lot to cover and a lot of issues, challenges that we're going to walk you through. The aim today is to discuss the evolution of ransomware, ransom attacks, and to walk you through the 7 stages of identifying, preparing, right through to recovering and following up on that. So we've got a fantastic panel today. And let me start by introducing the panel. We've got John Forrester. John is the CFO of DBG Canada Limited, a supplier to the truck, automotive, military, agricultural sectors as a Tier 1 and Tier 2 provider. John's previous positions include CFO of Newcap Industries, a supplier of brake technologies and components to OEMs, and Director Corporate Planning, Director Finance, and Treasurer Controller for Nissan Canada. John has been a member of FEI Canada for over 10 years, most recently as Chair of the Treasury and Capital Markets Committee. John has extensive international experience in finance and capital markets, M&A, growing and restructuring businesses, as well as HR, IT, and change management. As an FEI member, John's desire is to share his experience as well as learn from the experience of others to allow members to maximize success in their respective endeavors. John is also one of the 4 members of FEI's corporate private company steering committee and is chairing its private company finance through leadership group. So welcome to you, John. Secondly, we have Syed Hijazi. Syed is a director in RSM Canada's security and privacy risk practice, having more than 16 years of experience in cybersecurity and IT. Syed possesses deep knowledge of cybersecurity and private risk, governance models, frameworks, technologies, and leading practices. Syed's knowledge of security operations, cyber threat intelligence, incident handling, digital forensics, and the cybersecurity related regulations has enabled him to help organizations transform their cybersecurity practices to protect confidentiality, preserve integrity, and promote availability. Syed holds a master's degree and designations including CISSP, PMP, GCIH, GREM, CFE. He also teaches cybersecurity courses at the University of Toronto. So welcome, Syed. We also have Epsit Jajal from Ricoh Canada. He's the virtual CIO of Ricoh IT Services. Epsit has over 25 years of consulting and leadership experience across a broad spectrum of industries, including operational and leadership roles in finance, IT, service delivery, and professional services with organizations such as Deloitte, Danacor, Canada Life, Royal Bank, StarTech Global, the town of Caledon, CSDC Systems, and the City of Toronto. He's a versatile executive that has led major digital and business transformation initiatives in roles across the public and private sectors. Epsit is well respected for his digital leadership regarding the design and delivery of innovative, organizationally transformative, and high impact solutions for clients across Canada, the UK, US, and various Caribbean islands. Epsit has a BA in economics and an MBA from the Ivey School of Business at Western University, and is also a licensed CPA. In his spare time, he volunteers as a board member and a mentor for organizations such as Achev, the Center for Education and Training, the Change Foundation, Wood Green Community Services, and Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. Welcome to you, Epsit. And then our fourth panelist is Guillaume Neron. Guillaume is a senior leader in cybersecurity, bringing over 20 years of experience, during which he has held positions such as security and resilience practice leader, CISO, director of professional services, and consultant. In his current role as security and resilience practice leader at Kyndryl, he leads the Canadian strategy and helps customers achieve secure and resilient operations. In his previous position as Director of Professional Services, Security for Bell, he was acting as a trusted advisor for Bell's major customers on their cybersecurity journey. Guillaume also worked with Mandiant, leading its proactive team for Canada. His passion for cybersecurity has been driving him and has made him a prominent promoter and trusted collaborator in the industry. Above all, his past experience has given him the opportunity to serve the most demanding organizations. So we've got a fantastic panel and really looking forward to having them share their insights and challenges and be able to walk us through the process and understanding all of the elements of being attacked and how to recover from that. But I think the easiest place to start off with is, Guillaume, if you can share with us, attacks on our companies have evolved over the last couple decades. Can you provide an overview of how those attacks have morphed and what we need to be aware of now?
Yes, absolutely, Brad. Well, thank you for the question. First off, I'll say there's a lot to unpack when it comes to the evolution of ransomware over the course of what is now close to the last 20 years, right? Since the first ransomware that we saw in market around 2005 to today. And there's been a lot of factors that have influenced the evolution of ransomware. Like obviously some are technological, obviously other are economical in nature, other are political and cultural. And this really serves to highlight the complexity of the ransomware ecosystem, which is influenced by many aspects of day-to-day life. If we look at where ransomware typically, where they are the most affecting, it's within high-tech countries, rich countries, and in that sense, when we look at Canada, we're a prime target, right? So if we look at what StatsCan is telling us, 91% of all adults 15 years or older currently use the internet in Canada. right? So if you're looking at a country where you have a very large target that you can go after, well, Canada is definitely it. If we look at specifically the finance industry is the third most targeted industry for ransomware attacks. So this brings us to basically motivation, right, of overall attacks. Over the last year in 2020, around 38% of all attacks were motivated by financial gain. And if we look at the trend for year over year, this number keeps on increasing, showing the clear increase in ransomware prevalency. In between 2019 and 2020, according to a study by Bitdefender, we ended up with around 485% increase in the number of ransomware attacks, right? So we're seeing an acceleration, which is much faster on the side of the attackers than on the side of the defenders and their budgets. Specifically as it relates to the behaviors of the attackers, right? So in the beginning, what we're saying is they were using commodity malware. And why that is important? Well, commodity malware is easy to detect. There are things we know about. They were using low sophistication levels in their attacks, right? So they were easily thwartable. They were using a shotgun method, basically targeting as many people as humanly possible with non-targeted campaigns. So they were not customizing their message. They were only monetizing their attacks through the selling of decryption keys for the data they were encrypting. Now, what we're seeing today is very different. They're using custom malwares, right, which is much harder to detect. They're using high levels of sophistication as it relates to the type of attacks that they're using, so they increase their technical level. In the past, almost all of the initial compromise was done through emails and attachments. Now, today's we're seeing compromise happening in any way that a company can get hacked and evolving towards a ransomware attack. And I think one of the most important change is the way they're monetizing their attack. So in the past, only selling decryption keys. Today, they go in, they get inside of the network, they spend some time exploring, they exfiltrate data, they exfiltrate information on the executives of the company, see if they can find blackmailing material, and then they will go into multi-layered extortion campaigns. The first level will be, well, we'll sell you the key to decrypt your data. The second layer is going to be around, well, we can blackmail you on specific information we found on your personal life. If you do not pay us additional money, we will go and sell your data to your competitors. And if you refuse to do anything, we will go and publicly expose your company. And we've even seen case where they go and do a press release to say that on a specific date, they will go and expose the company's data or expose the executive secrets. So this is like a big change. Another one of the aspects, and I think I want to close with that, is the change in dwell time. So if we look over the years, threats in cybersecurity used to take a very long time before they were detected. And over time, we've gotten very good, right? We've got it, well, not very good, but I'd say much better. So not so long ago, it would take like over half a year for the average intrusion to be detected. And over 2019, we were down to 56 days. If we look at 2020, we've seen the biggest percentage improvement in reduction of dwell time. It went from 56 days to 24. And at first glance, that might look like a good idea and like great news, but it's not. What it really means is that there's more and more people getting hit by ransomware. They no longer need to detect the attacks because the ransomware will self-declare. And from that point on, that reduce the overall market dwell time for detection of malware and attacks. So I think those are some of the key aspects that we've seen in the transformation of the ransomware sector over the course of the last 15, 20 years. Oh, Brad, you're on mute.
I think feeding off of that, are you seeing a change in malicious attacks versus monetary benefit attacks?
So I think they're not necessarily the same type of actors, right? So when you look at the threat actors in market, you've got anything from the script kiddies to the nation states, right? And they don't have the same motivation. I'd say the one sector where the attacks are increasing the most is for financial gains, right? We're living in an unprecedented time because there is so much money to be made, and it's very, very rare that those actors get actually caught, that it's opening up a lot of opportunity for bad people. And we see it in all industry. Like, I mean, yesterday in Quebec, there's the largest artist, so a company taking care of the artist careers. So they got breached by ransomware. And it was actually textbook 2021 ransomware. The actors stayed within their network, explored before detonating their malware. They went in and they first started encrypting, then offered decryption keys, and then they started saying they would start releasing secrets on the artists, on the agents, on the owner of the company. So we're seeing that like in all industries. We saw that earlier this year with Kaseya. Kaseya is a software manufacturer that provides companies with monitoring software. So what the ransomware actor did is they spent sufficient amount of time to be able to introduce themselves into the supply chain of Kaseya, and then they use Kaseya to basically infect 1,800 of their customers. Right, so we're seeing this like getting to new levels of proportions.
Yeah, and I think that becomes the big challenges now is how do you prepare for it? And Syed, it'd be great to know, knowing these attacks continue to change. How does a company prepare, and are there key elements that every company should have in place to protect themselves or be prepared for when an attack does hit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad, and thanks, Guillaume, for the good intro into the ransomware. Before I actually respond to that, how we prepare, I wanted to, maybe for the benefit of the audience, I wanted to describe. You may have heard a lot about ransomware. Okay, this is ransomware. This organization was hit with ransomware. It just sounds like a very scary situation because of the specific word ransom in it. So let me actually take a step back very quickly and describe actually what a ransomware is. Many of you definitely know what it is, but for those who don't, I would just describe it very quickly. Ransomware is essentially a type of malware, malicious code that's infiltrating an organization and tries to essentially encrypt and code your data. That could be a part of your data, that could be your entire system. And makes it essentially, it renders it unusable. You cannot use your data, you cannot use the computer, you cannot provide services. And because it uses encryption, it's essentially nearly impossible for the organization to reverse that encryption and decrypt the data to use it unless you have an encryption key. So I hope that's providing a little bit of, that clears up that mystical, ransomware phrase. Now, with respect to getting prepared, I think because, as I said, ransomware is essentially a type of malware at the end of the day, and ransomware attacks are cybersecurity incidents by nature, a lot of the preparation steps are very similar to what you need to do with respect to other types of security incidents. The very basics are definitely going to apply. I would definitely start for any organization to understand your infrastructure, to know where your quote unquote crown jewels are, and understand what type of data is important for you. If you don't know what you have and where it is located, you're not going to be able to monitor for different types of security attacks, and you're not going to be able to protect it definitely. So I would definitely start with understanding my organization better, understanding my data, trying to come up with data classification policies that would help me focus my efforts on the most important and most sensitive types of information that I have. Going forward, after I understand what I have, I need to monitor the environment properly. Now, because again, ransomware has been more sophisticated in many cases, as Guillaume was just talking about, there's definitely a need to perform better monitoring and more up-to-date and a thorough monitoring of your environment for cybersecurity incidents. There's going to be a lot of tools around. I definitely don't want everyone to go and invest in every single tool that's out there, but know and invest in the right tool for your organization. Make sure that tools such as endpoint detection and response and proper monitoring is happening across the organization for any sign of attack. The earlier that you detect the attacks, the more successful you're going to be to protect your environment and contain that incident. So essentially, again, we want to shift the identification of attacks to as early as possible, and hopefully before half of your systems are encrypted and your business is crippled. So that monitoring and detection capability is definitely a key. And there is a lot of different, what we call in the industry, IOCs, or indicators of compromise. So for a good monitoring and detection capability, you need to know the indicators of compromise. What happens in the systems? What happens on your servers, on your laptops and desktops? What happens within the network traffic when there is a ransomware or any type of malware attacking you? So essentially, when you understand those indicators of compromise, you're going to be able to look for them ahead of time and hopefully stop the attack earlier, as opposed to later in the game. There's going to be essentially another part which is very important. Moving away from monitoring, we all know we can protect to the extent that we can protect. So things are going to happen, and things have happened. As Guillaume was just talking, things have been happening in magnitude of numbers compared to last few years. So now that things are happening, how do I get ahead of the game? The very first thing after monitoring that you need to do is having a strategy for incident response, making sure that you have an incident response plan. To know what you're going to do, what your team is supposed to do, how you're going to communicate, who are you going to get engaged if there is a ransomware attack. Some organizations are big enough, they can afford tens of people within their incident response team that can monitor the environment and spend a lot of time on responding. But some organizations may need to reach out to skilled resources and have retainer agreements with organizations that can come in, jump on the issue very quickly within a few hours or minutes and help contain the incident. So having that incident response plan is going to be a very, very important factor. And definitely, if you have one, you need to make sure that you are exercising it. You need to go through some sort of a tabletop exercise, some sort of a rehearsal, so the teams would know. I've talked to many of the executives in a formal setup, and I posed a question. Out of the 5 executives, do you know if you have an incident response plan? Out of the 5, 4 of them said, I don't think we have. And all of a sudden, the last one says, actually, we do. So that just shows that although there is an incident response plan, the key stakeholders of the organization have not rehearsed it, have not seen it. They don't know where to start. So that exercise is definitely going to help go through the issues more smoothly, hopefully. And so this is primarily from the technical aspect. What are we going to do? There's going to be skilled resources, there's going to be tools and monitoring. But the other part of it is looking at the insurance. How you can insure or purchase cyber insurance for your organization, and definitely looking into the aspects of insurance that are important, including the ransomware and how much the insurance is going to probably pay. And I'll definitely welcome any of the other panelists to share their thoughts on this. What is going to be the ceiling for the payments? If you are asked for $2 million of ransom, is your insurance going to pay for that, or are they going to have like a ceiling for it? So that is what I would suggest we start with for preparation.
And Epsit, would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Sure. Thanks very much. And I think Guillaume and Syed covered a lot of great things. There's a couple of quick things I'd like to just add for context that I think might be relevant. Number one is small and medium enterprise or businesses are actually probably a bigger target. The folks who are doing these attacks, they actually know that those organizations have less capability to be prepared and also to react to the incident. It's not just targeting the big ones. I think we hear more about the multinationals or the oil pipeline that gets whacked and held for ransom because that just makes the news. In my role, I work with organizations, multiple over the last year or so, that are all in the small and mid-size segment. And the attacks, as indicated by my colleagues, are very much more sophisticated. They, in some cases, have been in their network maybe for months, monitoring, watching what you're doing. They know how much money is in the bank. They know what your where wire transfers are occurring. There's a lot of this investigation that's going on. They are leveraging a lot of the encryption tools, which actually make your environment safer. So the tools you use to encrypt your files, they're using the same type of sophisticated tools and AI tools to learn about your business and your environment, so they know how to extract the maximum amount. And to the point made earlier, it's the financial gain is by far the easiest, and it's been luring a lot of technically savvy people into that world. So it's something to be aware of, and because you're a small or mid-sized organization, don't feel that you are not on the radar. You're very much on the radar. I'm working right now with an organization out on the West Coast, and just to give you an example of the sophistication, not only did they encrypt their files, they actually got into the programming servers that run their CNC machines. So what they did is they actually went in and they made adjustments on their CNC machines. So they knew how to do that. And so they ended up manufacturing product that was out of spec probably for a couple of weeks. And that's an extra payment that they're looking for if the company wants to know which products that they went and messed with, in addition to the $1 million+ that they're looking for on the ransomware piece of it. And to give you a sense of where they're going after, most organizations have central repositories for their data. It could be in the cloud, it could be on your premises on some storage servers. That's really their target. They're not interested in my laptop anymore. The only interest is how to get from that into your storage environment, because these encryption tools that they're running are working at the rate of about 10,000 files a minute. So you think about how many files you have in your organization and within how many minutes they can have you locked out. And we'll talk a little bit later in today's session around how you try to recover or contain that. But an analogy that I like to use in terms of this topic of preparation for organizations is to think about it like fire prevention. So you heard already about some of the other preparation steps that you need to do. It's very similar if I take the analogy of fire prevention. You have a building, you've made sure that you've got fire retardant materials, or the building code specified that. You've got fire extinguishers and fire hoses in case something happens. You've trained your staff what to do in the event of, and there's a fire drill, that's all practice. What's the meeting point? In a very similar way, organizations need to be much more proactive in being prepared from that perspective for these types of cyber attacks, because it's not a if, it is a when. It's on the rise. The last data I looked at, and my colleagues may have more recent information, but it's in the order of about 8,000 a day. And if you're trying to get a sense of what the financial opportunity is here, as a fellow accountant, maybe I could quickly break down for you just a really quick example in terms of the math of what the cost is to you as an organization, let alone what you might have to pay in ransomware. If I took an organization with 500 employees and 80% of those got affected, and 75% of those people have a dependency day to day on data access and your various IT systems and applications, then you assume if you have a fully loaded hourly cost per employee of $50, and say you're out for about 20 days. So that's about 168 hours times your $50. If it takes about 8 hours for an employee to restore, recreate files that they've lost access to and that sort of thing, and you do the math in that equation, you come out to about $2.5 million. That's just your internal cost of being attacked, let alone what the attacker is potentially looking for. So if you're looking for financial justification as to why you might need to invest in the preparation, do we have the right cybersecurity insurance, the right types of coverages? Do we have a partner in place that we can go to if something happens? Who is the legal team and the PR team that we're going to go to? Because depending on the nature of your business, you may also have reporting requirements that you need to go through and ensure that you're adhering to. So there's a lot of these things. You may even need to report up to your board on any incident. And based on what your board's risk tolerances might be, you may have to adjust the granularity of your planning or preparations for these types of situations. And lastly, it's like the fire drill piece, training. You always have to be vigilant and you have to be training your staff because there are lots of interesting ways that they are getting these malwares into your environment. It's even down now to it's not just a USB key that maybe got infected. If you think about in your cell phone, the micro SD card, which is the memory expansion, how tiny that is, smaller than your pinky fingernail. Well, the actual drive on that is maybe a third of that size. And they've figured out how to embed that into the end of a USB cable. And there's been a few instances where they found USB cables that were given out at trade shows or recharging or syncing your data actually have a little micro drive built in the end of that. So when you plug it into your computer, you think it's for charging your phone or syncing your data, but it was actually where they hid the malware and how they got it into your environment. So there are things like this that are always going on and you can't protect yourself from all of them. And so being prepared to deal with the outcomes of an attack are critical.
Great, thanks, Epsit. And Guillaume, do you have anything you'd like to support on that before we move to the next section?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go quickly. So what I want to say is, I think ransomware for non-technical, non-cybersecurity people can be very intimidating, right? Because it is a complex problem that requires deep understanding of the interaction in between the different IT systems, how the users interact with this, how access is managed, and all of these things. So it might intimidate non-IT people in getting into the subject of how to approach it. But I think there are some very simple questions that can be asked out of the organization in order to assess, like, are we in somewhat of a good place, right? So if we go back to some of the basics, like ransomware are viruses, and viruses need to execute, right? So questions you can ask your IT is, well, how do we stop malware from entering our network? Like, if there's no good answer to that question, well, that is a problem. How do we stop unknown executables from executing on our systems? If there's no good answer to that, then there might be a problem. Do we have a documented incident response plan? Do we know how we will detect exfiltration of data if it is to happen? Do we know which data is important to us? So there are some very simple questions that you can ask yourself. Another very important one, and I'll go back to that initial dwell time, right? So we said that the attacker dwell for 24 days before they typically detonate the encryption. So what that means you've got 24 days to act, right? So you want to know then from your IT department, like, how do we go about detecting initial compromise? Because basically from that initial compromise, you got 24 days to act on average, right? So that's on the IT side. On the more general business front, right? Some of the questions you need to be able to answer is, so how do we manage the trust of our people and our reputation in market once this happens, right? Because we've seen instances of companies getting hit by ransomware and managing it very, very badly. And the way they did was more damageable, monetary speaking, than the actual damage that the ransomware did, right? So also be prepared on your PR relationships, have the right contracts in place with the right people to help you. And that extends way beyond IT.
Great, thanks, Guillaume. Actually, it's a really nice transition talking about the dwell time of attackers being in your system, and the fact that these are on the rise. I mean, John, maybe you can give some highlight to the fact that how do you know when an attacker's been in your system?
Okay, first I want to make sure everyone can hear me. You can hear me? Okay, that's good. So yes, that's I think I want to just highlight some things that have already been shared, and Guillaume already touched on it, the dwell time. You got so much time to figure this out. And then we've had comments from Epsit and Syed about, what am I going to do about this? So just to put things in context, we're talking about private companies. I work for a big public company where the resources and the staffing for IT were basically whatever you needed, you got. Private companies, especially the smaller ones, don't have the resources or the sophistication in IT. And actually, a lot of them rely on one person, maybe two at the most. And they rely heavily on their firewall providers. And if they're fortunate, they might even have a third-party provider who monitors activities outside this firewalls for something that's unusual. And I think we heard a comment of indicators of compromise. I think Syed mentioned that. But the real world of the private company is we don't have those kinds of levels of sophistication. We don't have those resources. We have legal firms who generally do not have a specialist or department that specializes in ransomware. You pretty well have to get referred on this stuff. So this is the real world we function in. And so a lot of how do you determine whether you've even experienced any kind of compromise and therefore assess what the impact of the business is, which then drives all the decisions on how do you deal with it, what communications you have to make, do you negotiate for ransomware, and every business decision that goes forward is, first of all, you have to understand if this happened. And if Guillaume said that it on average is 24 days, and so they fish around in the system, find out how your company works or where your vulnerabilities are, what's their value. The real trick here is you have to have your IT group make sure that they're monitoring all available activity reports, because it's easy for them just to, every firewall spits out a lot of stuff and says, here it is, but no one's looking at it. You have to have somebody looking at it. But the key thing we found is you have to educate all your people, all your staff and associates about their day-to-day activities. And if there's something unusual about their job that everybody relies on some kind of information, whether it's the CNC operator on the floor or it's somebody in the finance department or somebody in sales, if they experience anything unusual, whether it's an email from somebody they don't know who it is, or it's some kind of access to data or files that aren't doing what they used to do before, they should immediately raise that with the IT group and ask, what's going on with my file? You can't be shy about this stuff, because often something will come in like just a random email. Somebody opens it, plants something, it gets in and waits somebody to open something else, and then it starts to go on its journey, and eventually the ransomware activity makes itself present at some point in time. So I think the key thing that we've seen in the past is sometimes you don't even know you've been attacked. Sometimes there's activities going on within your organization's IT world, and most of the time it's a user who says, what, by the way, when I did this, this happened to me last week for the first time, and now it's reoccurring. You need to follow up on those kinds of activities. And sometimes if the IT people are looking at something and they go, what, suddenly the data volume from those files to those files has doubled up or tripled up. And that's why I mentioned the third-party service providers. They can do some of this for you. But again, we only have limited budgets here. You have to follow up on why did all the traffic on that particular file double or triple suddenly? Are we doing something different here, or is this an unusual event? So you really have to be aware of your work environment from an IT context. And if for most users who don't have a clue about anything except here's my on button for my laptop or my whatever item has software on it, but if they experience unusual activities, they need to be told that, you know, follow up immediately with IT folks and let them know that there's something going on here. And it maybe it's just a bug, but more often than not, if it's occurring over and over, there's something going on there. And I guess the other key thing that I want to just point out here is we talked about the data. Everybody runs software and we get updates in software, and software generally can be updated, upgraded, or replaced, but your data is your key thing. And I think I heard all previous commentators on this panel say that you have to really know what's of value to you. And so a backup system. So if your data is compromised, are you backing up your data in a timely manner and in a sufficient manner so it can be easily recovered, so that even if something is locked out or encrypted, you can just delete this piece, pull up another server, whether it's virtual or otherwise, and pull your data up again and re-engage it. But again, even when you're doing that, you have to be aware that this particular whatever malware may be in your system may actually be waiting for you to do that again and go back and do it to the same thing, so that it's not quite that simple. So again, I think my point here is that you have to rely on the people in your organization, especially because there's no level of sophistication in a lot of these smaller private companies, but they have to be aware that, you know what, I can't do this anymore, or I used to be able to do it this way. We didn't have a software update. What's happening here? You gotta educate them. We have an education program where people have to go online, and we talk about when you get an email that doesn't look familiar, when you see this kind of activity. But these are what I call the basic how to identify it, because this is then going to allow the organization to determine how is this impacting my business. Because if it's a significant impact on your business, you may be, and you're unable to recover from it, then that forces a decision to negotiate and pay for decryption key. And by the way, even when you get a decryption key, it's no different than when you do a new software upgrade. You don't push a button and boom, in 1 hour or 24 hours, everything's up and working again. The reality is there'll be corrupted data no matter what happens, and it may take weeks or months for all the decryption to take place, and you're going to find out some things don't work the way they used to before, because encryption is very, it doesn't care what it does to your software or to the communications of your files and databases. It just does a full-blown just attack, and that's it. And then you may have other issues after. So even that's not the best solution at the end of the day, but it may be the only one if you want to recover critical data. And so knowing what's going on in your system, identifying these unusual activities before as Guillaume said, the dwell time comes up, may allow you to head things off at the pass, or start determining where the attack is taking place, and also how critical this is to your business. And then you can start making decisions about contacting the law firm, the insurance company. Is there a PR issue here? And in reality is, if you have an insurance coverage policy, they have very definitive guidelines about what they expect to happen, and they usually will bring in their own specialists. So you have coverage for a ransomware attacks and paying the ransom. You will get a lot of guidance from there. You also need legal guidance depending on your business. If you're a consumer or public related, you may have privacy issues that have to be communicated as well. But this is what I call the smorgasbord of every business issue coming to a head, and most private companies don't have the skill or the resources to handle this by themselves, and they're going to have to amp up the spend when something like this happens and reach for the right place. But again, another comment that came up before is at least have people in mind when you're ready to go. Who do I reach out to on the legal side? Who do I reach out on the insurance side? Who do I reach out on PR side? On the audit firm side, you just need to know who are your go-to people if this happens, because that's when the spending does start as well. So that's my comments on the, how do you find out and how do you determine the impact in your organization? That's kind of where you start.
And
Guillaume, add a couple of things
what's your experience been?
Sorry, Brad?
Yeah. Sorry, if I could add just a couple of things to what John was saying. The other thing to keep in mind for your organization is that this is a trend that is increasing, and that is attacks from third parties that are related to your business are on the rise. So what I'm talking about there is what's known in the industry as island hopping. So people within your supply chain. So you need to, it's not just about your own preparation and vigilance. It's also about those that you are interacting with on a regular basis. Your IT team, for example, or your outsourced service provider doesn't necessarily have access to your suppliers or some of your resellers, for example, if you're dealing in a business-to-business environment. Data is going back and forth all the time through EDI and other means. And so that is an increasing way in which these malwares are getting into organization systems. So they're trying to basically go up and down your entire supply chain. And so what this really means is that, you know, if you're in the business where you deal with sensitive data, if I use that example, such as healthcare, you already have in place certain rules, regulations, and best practices for how you manage not only that information, sensitive information internally, but also with others who utilize that information. And so you should take a similar approach here. The other couple things I'd quickly like to add just around the preparation topic. Most organizations are pretty good about doing backups, but do you have security barriers to your backups? Do you actually validate your backups? If your backups are all contaminated, well, they're not much use to you. And people who are attacking you know that your first step is going to be, oh, so you locked down my files. Aha, I'll go and restore everything from my backups from yesterday. Well, if they were already in there 3 or 4 weeks ago, good luck. And then the other piece is consider what you need to do in your preparation as part and parcel of your organization's business continuity planning, your incident response plan, your disaster recovery plans. What do you do after you've been down, as John was touching on? It's been 10 days since you got attacked and you've essentially been shut down. Okay, now you've paid, you've recovered, whatever the case may be. How do you bring those last 10 days back? How do you do the catch up? Do you have all of that in place? So there's a lot of other implications you need to think through, and it does get more challenging in a small to mid-sized organization, which is why you have remediation firms and other third parties, such as mine or some of the other panelists organizations. And you should really look at leveraging some of that, at least in terms of getting the insights, if not the direct help. I'll leave it with that, Brad.
Perfect. And Guillaume, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, so again, very quickly, it's very important when it comes to detection to have collected the right data, right? So and when you go into you've declared a ransomware attack and you call someone to help, they will require access to the right data. So before you go into an event, it's very important that you collect the right logs from your servers, that you keep them for sufficient amount of time, that you have the right logging levels, because if you do not keep those things, well, simply said, finding patient 0 will be close to impossible. Getting to the information as to where it went from patient 0 to the end of the attack is going to be close to impossible. And you're going to be faced into a situation where you will never have full assurance that you took care of the threat, because you cannot track everywhere it went. So I think that's really, really important. And I guess the rest has already been covered, right? Having access to the right people, having access to the right tooling, making sure you continuously evolve your detection capabilities, right? So keep up with the attackers is also important. But those were my quick comments, right? So basically make sure you don't, by lack of planning, put yourself in a place where you'll end up always wondering, well, do I still have a bad guy in my network? Right? I think that's important.
No, it's a big challenge. And I think once you've got, you get an understanding of the extent of the threat, and you're trying to figure out, where do you begin to overcome? And I guess the second part of that is contain the threat. Who needs to know about the attack, and what do you do if you decide to pay? Syed, what are your thoughts? So you've got governance board, you've got authorities that you might need to bring in. What are your thoughts and recommendations?
Absolutely, thank you for that. So I want to actually start with kind of combining what we just heard from Guillaume and John, and as well definitely Epsit. There's the before we want to start kind of quote unquote containing. I wanted to take a quick step back and first of all definitely endorse what Guillaume just talked about with respect to making sure that you have taken the right steps before you go through that recovery. A part of that containing is after containing the incident, after making sure that you stop the bleeding and you're in a good control of the attack situation. You want to make sure that you can go back to recovery. But before you do that, unfortunately, I have run and my groups have run into many situations where we started to help a client recover, but when we got to the environment, the IT department, whether internal or external managed service provider, had gone through re-imaging or re-preparing essentially a lot of the machines, a lot of the computers. And when we get in, again, I will use what Guillaume mentioned, that the phrase of patient zero is no way for us to find. So again, I don't want to make it a lot, technical in nature, but if you're a small firm and you don't have a lot of people internally to assist, and you don't have the appetite and the budget to invest in a lot of incident response and monitoring activities, what you want to do, at least from your incident response plan, it doesn't need to be a sophisticated technical document of tens and tens of pages, but make sure at least those key steps are indicated in your incident response plan. One of those key steps is make sure we are not touching the systems in a hurry, and we are not giving those systems to people that are not sure what they're doing. Let's make sure that we get those that know what's supposed to happen engaged as soon as possible, because if you lose that time, if you lose that momentum, there's nothing that even a skilled resource can do if you have recovered many of your systems and you have lost your log files and audit records, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Now, going back to containing, I think you want to make sure that first of all, it doesn't happen again to the extent possible, right? One of the things that can happen over and over is once a criminal organization, an adversary finds out that you have been a target, they will probably try to launch another attack, or maybe not them, another similar group, because the information about your organization is probably lurking around in the dark net, in criminal forums, and they now know that you have been a target. And many times they even share the details of the attack, so they know how exactly you got hit. So it's very important to take a step back and see what really happened to us, how we can stop that. One of the things that you can do is running cyber threat intelligence reports, just to see after the attack or during the attack, what is out there about you, what type of information has been released. Now, with respect to that the type of data, it can greatly help. You cannot take it back. Once the data is out there, it's out there. You cannot retrieve it. You cannot, essentially go back to the days before the attack. But what you can do is at least know what's out there about you, and know potentially that what is going to be threatening you in the future. What the other attackers know about you now. Let me go and fix those holes. Let me make sure that I'm prepared based on what has been out there about me. One of the other key steps with respect to containing and during those initial phases of attack is that ransom negotiations. A lot of times you're dealing with a large or relatively large criminal organization. There could be even language barrier. It could be from another part of the board that you cannot really understand what they're talking about. There are firms that can assist you with actually doing the ransom negotiations. Sometimes they start with $2 million ask, and I have seen great success stories bringing that down. I hope that you never had to pay, but bringing that down to a quarter of that amount. So there is, because those firms that I'm referring to essentially know a great deal about these groups, these criminal groups. They know their motivations. They know what they usually target. If they usually start from a high amount and go down, or they usually go from a low amount and go up. So they know a lot of those tactics about these criminal organizations. So it's really, I think, helpful if you actually try to hand over that negotiation part to someone who knows how to do that. So that's from the kind of technical standpoint. But when it comes to the governance aspects and requirements for disclosure, well, I don't know if you have seen many of you within the financial sector. You may have seen the new requirements a couple of months ago from OSFI. That is actually one example. Now, OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of the Financial Institutions, requires the regulated financial institutions to declare cyber and IT incidents. That was not a requirement before, but is now a requirement from OSFI to declare to us and disclose to OSFI that you have been dealing with an incident. So that is just one example. There is numerous other regulations requiring disclosure of incidents. And just keep in mind, when there is a ransomware attack, it doesn't only mean, we have talked about it since the beginning, it doesn't necessarily mean that your files have been encrypted only. These days, as Guillaume was also talking about, there is a lot of exfiltration of data, stealing data before that mic drop for the ransomware malware to action. So before that the files are encrypted, there is a lot of information probably stolen from you. Now, that could mean that there is potentially breach of personal information. So don't look at it from, okay, here is what I'm dealing with. My files have been encrypted. I have to get back to a normal course of business through my backup restoration, and that's it. So try to evaluate what is possibly going out. And based on that, there's going to be numerous regulations. There is GDPR in the Europe. There is a whole lot in the US. There's PIPEDA in Canada. There's OSFI that I just talked about. So make sure that you understand. Again, it's not necessary for a small firm. It's not necessarily very feasible to know all of these nuances, but it's definitely worth having legal counsel. And again, it goes back all to that preparation phase. Make sure that you have access to the right people in the right amount of time. Having access to skilled resources that we just talked about it numerous times is not something that you can do in a blink of an eye. When in the morning, when you deal with a declared ransomware, people are like, half of your computers are encrypted. There's no time for you to go shop for a provider. Make sure that that has happened beforehand, as well as your legal counsel. If there's going to be any communication that needs to go out to law enforcement, probably to even FBI. A lot of Canadian organizations have been collaborating with FBI in the US and the like in Canada, CSIS and whatnot, to just make sure that there is a potential for recovery of some of the funds. So how do you communicate with these organizations? If you have templated communication available, it's going to definitely help you down the road. Again, there is no time. You want to be acting as fast as possible. You're not going to spend time on figuring out what the proper language is when it comes to dealing with this type of situation. And in terms of, again, involvement of authorities, I think I just talked about that. There's a great deal of information from the Canadian Cybersecurity Center that is also very connected to the US counterparts and also around the globe. So having those in mind, again, there's not necessarily a need for you to initiate all of that communication all at once, but depending on situation, make sure, again, at least your legal counsel knows about the potential requirements for you to get to the authorities or to disclose to regulators.
Great. If I could add a couple things to what you were saying, spot on. And I mean, I think for our audience, I mean, one of the things I had mentioned I wanted to expand a little bit, it goes beyond your organization. As others have mentioned, exfiltration of your data is actually one of the main goals here. It's not just a simple extortion for money. There's a lot of other value that's available, and that's what they're after. We're not dealing with pious individuals who are only here for one thing and they're never going to bother you again. The dark web is full of all kinds of personally identifiable information, and there are what's known as information aggregators out there. And so even today, off of public spaces from social media and other places, they're already building a profile on you. Different organizations are using AI tools to do this, to scrape information off the internet. The holy grail is to be able to add validated, specific details about individuals. So for example, if they got into your payroll system, they now know that person X at your company, how much do they get paid? They have an account at this financial institution. Potentially, here's the bank account number, because that's where the funds get auto deposited through your payroll provider. And so it goes on and on. And even though that particular incident may not involve the attacker saying, well, I'm going to expose Brad's, income online. I mean, if it was, a certain organization where there's some value, they may do that. But instead, they may have actually taken all that data in those days or weeks before you even knew you got attacked, and they've gone and published that information on these other sites where other aggregators are working. So now you also have to think about, part of your strategy needs to include, how do I protect my employees? How do I protect my partners? What's gone out there? And to the points that were made by Syed and Guillaume, if you don't have the capability of understanding what data has been viewed, copied or moved and that sort of thing, which can be a very technical exercise, then you may not understand who all is affected. And so these are just a couple of other points that you really need to keep in mind. And sometimes, we even hear about silent attacks where they've actually gotten in, they're after this type of data and information. There wasn't really a ransom that was going to be asked for. They may leave their malware in there for future use, but really what they got a gold mine of other stuff, like, oh, gee, they use Excel to do all their payroll. I hope there's no one in the audience that does that still. And so there's the name, address, phone number, social insurance number, the bank name, the bank account number, where you deposit the checks, the whole thing. Wow, that's good information. And then, are you prepared to disclose that? Do you have something in place? And this is, I've seen a couple of questions in the chat about, the governance and how the board gets involved. These are all the types of things that you need to think through. What's the risk tolerance of the board? What's going up to the board? What's been said to the organization? At what level of detail they need to be involved in, and a lot of the other points that my colleagues have touched on.
So it's John. I'd like to add some comments. Again, you've heard from the experts on this. I pretend not to be an expert in any of this stuff, but if you're the CFO or CIO or general manager or president of your organization, and there's been an event or compromise, this is your new full-time job, and it's the whole team's full-time job. Just the amount of detail that's been discussed already, you can see this is not a one-person affair, and to sift through all this, but it's also about key decision-making for the business. What are we going to do? What's the impact of the business? How do we handle this? Who's going to handle that? Who's going to deal with the lawyer? This is a major resource consumer, people and money, and you have to be geared up for that. So you need that kind of, even if you don't have a formal incident response plan, you kind of know you're signing up as soon as something like this happens. For all the key decision makers in the organization have to be involved, have to be informed. There has to be daily updates, if not hourly, depending on the speed of how this moves. You're in this, and you just got a new full-time job on your regular day job. So you cannot underestimate. And again, based on all the conversations we've had already, there's a ton of work here. I mean, just to get an insurance policy for your company, which includes a cyber piece, is weeks or maybe a couple of months worth of work easily. Now you're going into full mode: insurance, legal, accounting, audit. Does the business work, et cetera, and you're dealing with all that at the same time. You got limited time, so you really do need to get geared up. And as soon as you smell an issue, you got to get all over it and start thinking about it, because it can get away on you real quickly. And so you cannot underestimate the amount of time and effort something like this is going to take up, because basically it's your business that's on the line, and making the right choice is critical going forward. And I'm Brad. I'm just going to let you know I have to jump off in a few minutes. So if I disappear, that's why. But again, I just wanted to get my comments in before I had to get off.
No, fabulous, John. It was great to have you be part of the conversation and get your insights. And I think before we move into questions from the group, I'd love to hear from Guillaume on that portion, as well as kind of talking about the recovery and, you know, making sure you're prepared for the follow-on, because I think Epsit really
Yes.
highlighted it. They get in your system and they may still be in your system after you've started the recovery. So how do you protect yourself?
Yeah, so I'll go very, very fast. So recovery, right? The first thing you're gonna ask yourself is, do I pay or do I not pay, right? So obviously, if you don't have the right backups, you don't have the right access to your data and your business runs on it, well, you're gonna be very well tempted to pay, right? As was mentioned before, if you have to pay, keep in mind that you're dealing with criminals. There's no guarantee you'll get your key that's actually gonna unlock your data, right? If you do pay them. So go and get people that are used to negotiating access to the key, so that they ask for chunks of data to be decrypted and sent back to them, as an example, to validate that the attacker actually has the means of getting back your data. Another thing that's really important when you're talking about recovery is like work with law enforcement. Like a lot of the keys for the decryption of large ransomware campaign are held by law enforcement agencies. So if you reach out to them, you declare it, chances are they might be able to give you the decryption keys, right? So I think that's also another important thing. When you go into recovery, clean your systems, right? Because they got in through a way they encrypted. You decrypt, does it mean they can no longer encrypt? Not necessarily. Like, make sure you go into deep cleaning mode. And if you are not sure, rebuild. On data restoration, so there's multiple things here. The very first one is you want to identify what is your minimally viable company, your MVC, okay? And what that is, those are the baseline systems you need to have in place in order for your company to be able to run at the most basic level. Now, for those systems, look at technology solutions such as cyber vaulting, which will allow you point-in-time backups of those systems to non-modifiable storage, so that basically you have snapshot of those systems through time, and you can quickly, through automation, redeploy them. So your company can basically be spun right off after. For all other backups, make sure they're kept in a place where they cannot be accessed, right? And modified and encrypted, right? So ensure that you have air-gapped backups towards your regular systems, right? So, and there's a whole lot more that could be said about the resiliency side of this discussion, right? So when we talk about replication, backups, cyber vaulting, simulations, right, that you can do as it relates to restoring your content, because it's one thing to go through the cybersecurity incident, but do you also test that you have a capability to rebuild your systems, right? That's also very important. But I think there are companies that can definitely help as it relates to the resiliency problem. And it's definitely something that is often overlooked. So please don't do that mistake, right? Make sure that you have a cyber resiliency program in place that is supporting your cybersecurity program.
Great, thanks, Guillaume. And anybody have any last thoughts before we move into questions from the audience?
If I could add just a couple of things to that, those are great points, Guillaume. I think the other thing that we often forget is, remember, these criminals are in your organization. They've gotten in somehow. And so we've talked about all of these communications that you have with various parties internally. You're talking to your lawyers and maybe the police about how am I going to negotiate the ransom. Odds are they're watching all of your emails, so they know exactly who you're talking to and what you're doing. So do you have an alternative means of communication? So be aware of that. So I was involved in a situation exactly like that, where there was a discussion on email about how they were going to negotiate, and the hacker was actually watching the whole thread. And so they just sort of went to the bottom line, said, I know you guys talked about this. I haven't got time. I want this. And, you know, and for every 30 minutes you take to come back to me, I'm going to add $1 million. Is basically how it went. This is extortion. This is how these things go. So be aware of that and keep that in mind. when you're looking at these things. And there are certain expertise that are available in the marketplace through different specialized companies that can help you with some of these things. So as an example, not intended as a plug, but I do work with an organization where they actually take copies of your data and they have live copies of known ransomware, and they can actually execute those against your data, and your team can practice the rebuild and recovery. And so this could be part of your organization's strategy around how do I test my resilience? How do I test how we deal with these things? It doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly the way you can do it, because these things evolve and change. But just like a fire drill that I mentioned earlier, if you have an IT department where you have staff that is going to be sort of leading this, having them with some experience going through a couple of these types of simulations is going to be helpful.
Fabulous. And I think we've got a ton amount of questions coming through. I think Norm Ferguson, you wanted to jump in with a couple. Damien, can we spotlight Norm?
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting and insightful conversation, the challenges with this ransomware. And that in the small and medium-sized companies are limited resources, very tight. I think as John alluded to, 1 or 2 IT experts looking through things. You know, they're doing the patches, they're monitoring the systems, they're doing backup, sort of the basic that you can do. But sometimes with those limited resources, it gets difficult. And you may have a disaster recovery plan, but what I'm hearing today is actually an incident response plan, and actually going a lot further to do a normal, data recovery. One of my questions, I guess, gets into it, like when you're talking about insurance, legal, you may have PR issues, could be client data. So then you have market impacts. Who is best to lead this? I know the responsibility of risk management sometimes lands with the CFO, but where else, a CIO in larger companies, but how can small companies really get a handle on this without the overloading? Because it seems like a huge burden of work to take on with the rest of your job.
In my experience, Norm, it's a great question. It's the general manager or the CEO. It's not necessarily the CFO. The CFO may be executing a number of the steps and take the lead in certain areas, but this is a situation where your organization has been compromised. You are being held for ransom. So imagine you're in another part of the world where it's some guy with a machine gun standing at the front door and won't let you out unless you pay. This is just the electronic cyber version of that. And so to relegate that to someone down in the organization isn't going to be the best way to do it unless that person has the knowledge, experience, and authority to go and execute on a lot of these things. Keep in mind that in many of these situations, your company may be dead, as in you cannot function. A lot of organizations are completely reliant on their applications and their information systems, in that if you turn them all off one day, there was no electricity and no battery backup, how would you operate? It's part of everyone's BCP plan of what you do in a power outage, but this isn't that different. And so I would say the responsibility starts there, and that leader in that organization, whether it's the GM, the president, whatever their title happens to be, potentially even the chair of the board of directors, they are the ones in there. It's a full-time job. It's a day in, day out until you get this resolved and you are recovered, kind of a all hands on deck sort of a situation. And in terms of the small IT department, that's very common, what you pointed out. And I think that's what my colleagues and I have been stressing in our comments today, is that this is where you need to seek expertise. You may have a little bit of experience in reading contracts, but you still go and engage a law firm to review your contracts, especially an important big one. So this is probably not that different. And from a budgeting perspective, I would suggest that organizations start, if they haven't already, to think about line items in their operating budgets to deal with these sorts of things. Because the insurance, I'll just quickly touch on that before my colleagues jump in. A lot of people think they have cybersecurity insurance, and it may say the word cybersecurity, but there's often a cap. And I have clients who have been shocked when they found out that the cap was $200,000 and they're being asked to pay $2 million. Your cybersecurity insurance may also be dependent on what were you doing as an organization to mitigate this, right? I mean, you can't buy life insurance for your employees and then, you know, for your company picnic, everyone's going skydiving. Right? We all know about that carve out insurance. So in a similar way, your insurance company is going to start asking you questions. Oh, nobody updates your firewall patches. You don't have an IT guy dedicated. You know, sorry, fine print. You're not covered. So now what do you do? Right. So have you thought these through? Have you looked at it? And are you prepared? Now I'll turn the floor back over to you.
I want to add a bit of flavor based on things I've seen, and it's actually something very sad that I've seen happen more than one time, right? I've seen ransomware shut down SMBs, like them getting hit, them not being able to get up, and then closing like 50, 100, 200 employees basically losing their job. And it all comes down to understanding what is the impact of ransomware to your business, right? As an example, if you don't rely on computer system and you just use them because it's convenient, then maybe it's not so bad for you. If 100% of your production line is running through computers and we shut you down for 60 days, do you survive? If all of your customers start reach out to you and say, well, you've leaked all of my most important secrets. Let's say you're a law firm, like will you survive that attack, right? So the question is, and it's the same for any risk management discussion, is what is the size of the risk, right? And the money you're putting toward protecting against it should be a fair size versus the risk, right? And I understand that you might not be putting all of these things toward your IT budget today, but the question is it worth it to put those things toward your IT budget versus the impact of a ransomware attack hitting your company?
I could just quickly add something to what Guillaume was saying, Norm. It becomes part of your organization's risk tolerance to somebody's question about the board and risk tolerance. So as an organization, you really need to look at it from that perspective, because you also can't be in the situation where you're allocating 40% of your OpEx to cybersecurity, because you're not going to survive that way either. So you're going to have to come to terms with what can I and should I do within reason to protect our business and our investments without crippling us. And what do we do if something happens? What are our tolerances? What's acceptable? So to Guillaume's point, can we afford to be out for 24 days? If not, let's prepare for that so that we have that window of time. That sort of idea.
Thanks, Epsit. And I'd love to give the opportunity for Raymond to jump in with, I know he had a couple questions in the chat.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon to all. I have a couple of questions. What is the legality of actually paying ransom? Because you've said be prepared to pay. And yet I've read things that say you may be supporting the proceeds of organized crime or international terrorism, and there may be consequences for paying someone. So what is the right answer?
So I'd say it's a question. It's not as much a question of legality. It's more a question of ethicality, right? So I don't think there's any law stopping you from paying a ransomware to get back access to your data. To your point, there are societal impacts in doing so. You're encouraging criminals from continuing what they're doing. Some of them are using that money. You're absolutely right to carry out some very bad actions. There's even been case of North Korea being identified behind some of the ransomware campaigns in order to fund their nuclear program, right? So absolutely, there are ethical considerations. That being said, again, how do you weigh those ethical considerations versus your company survival?
I'll just add a quick thing to that, Raymond. I mean, right now, as Guillaume mentioned, there is no quote unquote law to prevent you from paying ransom, but there are a number of states down in the US that are actually discussing, passing regulations to declare paying ransom illegal. It hasn't been confirmed yet, it hasn't passed, but at least I believe 4 or 5 of the states are discussing that. So in the future, you may see paying ransom becoming an illegal activity because of the same situation that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask a kind of a follow-on question, Syed. You mentioned the bad guys, you may have language issues dealing with them, but I've read also that the bad guys like to be paid in ways that are untraceable, like Bitcoin, and that firms get into all kinds of trouble trying to set up ways to pay the bad guys because they deal with real money in legal ways and not with Bitcoin. They are they're running against time, because they're trying to figure out how to transfer funds to Bitcoin, how to actually use Bitcoin. Can you comment on that as well? Because this is a huge problem for someone who is contemplating paying.
It certainly is a big problem, and I think it goes back to that preparation that we were talking about. Again, I really don't have a better answer than having access to the right resources and skilled resources, organizations that can essentially perform a lot of that negotiation on your behalf. Absolutely, you're right. A part of it is actually securing the funds. I think we wanted to cover that as well. Making sure, what based on your risk tolerance, what is the threshold that you actually can pay? If you decide to pay, if there's no other technical way to recover, for example, as Guillaume was mentioning, recover from law enforcement, or you have your backups, that's great. But if you decide to pay, how are you going to do that? Does your organization as for example, we mentioned one IT person know how to transfer money and exchange Bitcoins and transfer Bitcoin? That is again what there are organizations, again, not necessarily pointing to myself, all of us on this panel know that we can assist with connecting you. There is some part of it from the technical aspects that is more common, but that negotiation part actually, and like an organization like ours doesn't even do that, because that's a very I guess gray area, right? We don't want to actually put our own employees in the risk of negotiating with a cyber criminal somewhere else in the world. So we do actually have access to quote unquote fourth parties that can actually perform that. But again, I certainly want to point you to the direction of pros in this realm that can actually do that negotiation, do the transfer, and on all of that, because I have been involved in some of these negotiations and it gets very, very nasty very quickly. And with a lot of, I have been actually even talking about hours and minutes where the price of Bitcoin changes. Of course, we all know about that, and the cryptocurrency, and the amount that the attackers are asking in Bitcoin is going to change within a few minutes. So yeah, that's my best answer for that.
Thank you so much.
And I guess just to reinforce, because I agree 1,000,000% with Syed on this. So when you go and procure an incident response retainer, so that you have someone to call, ask them, can you negotiate ransomware conditions for my company? Can you help me acquire Bitcoins and all of that? If the answer to that is no, it doesn't mean it's the wrong company, but it means you need to ask them the second question of, okay, do you have a partner that can help me with that?
Got it. Now, I have one last question about cyber insurance, and this is coming from experience with our carrier. So they do have exclusions in the policy for things like not keeping your network up to date. So that was a really good point. The other is around their required list of providers. So if you have an incident that occurs, you are required to go through the carrier's providers, who look like very expensive companies. They're like, I won't name them, but they're like gold-plated firms, right? And we're a medium-sized business. So we also had a cyber provider and we had a retainer with them. And when we signed the policy, we realized that this provider is not on the list and they would not recognize that provider. So are we being taken advantage of by insurance by forcing you to work with their specified firms?
So I'll go on this one. So I spent some time at Mandiant, which is the worldwide leader in incident response. The rates are preposterous. Let's put it like that. So we're talking about something like $450 US an hour per resource. Okay. Yeah. If you look at why insurance companies are doing this, is because they assess the capabilities of the incident response company so that they can ensure that there's a minimum of quality. There's a lot of people that see those $450 USD an hour rate and say, well, I can hire somewhat qualified people and charge them 250, right? But those people are not qualified. They don't have the right tool set, and they don't have the right capability to handle burst. So look at it from a business model perspective. What is an incident response company? It's a company that tells you that they will guarantee you that they will be there when you need them. And what that means is that they have people on the bench waiting for you to call, right? Because if they don't have people on the bench, when you call, they cannot help you, right? So they have a lot of sunk costs in that sense. They need to be able to deal with the latest attack patterns, right? And they need to be able to recognize them fast because time is of the essence. What that means having extensive research and development capability in order to research them, replay them, and know how to deal with them. It means having extensive training budgets for their employees, and it also means to have extensive access to tools, and those tools don't come cheap, right? So if you look at all of that, the rates are expensive. If you'd ask me today, like, Guillaume, like, I'm giving you $1 million, do you want to start an incident response company tomorrow? I'm not sure I would, because, like, personally, I think there's a lot of risk there. So I think, yes, they force your hand somehow, but at the same time, they give you options, right? You don't have a single provider that they're pointing you to. Oftentimes, it's like 5 to 10. So pick one of those horses. And understand that those companies have been vetted for quality.
Yeah, those are great points, Guillaume. And Raymond, if I could add a couple of things, and that is, you can still sometimes leverage your own resources or a company that you want to deal with and use that to mitigate some of your cost, especially with regards to taking care of some of the legwork. So you may be, for example, able to negotiate with some of these insurance providers to say that, listen, I'm going to use one of your authorized or vetted partners, but I don't need them to do all the little things. I want to use this other company who can take instructions from them and go and execute, because maybe those guys you're paying $200 an hour, whereas the other company is $500 an hour. So you may be able to mitigate it, but now remember, you are introducing additional risk, additional oversight requirements, management, and a lot more probability of someone going, it was their fault, right? And when you have a very, very small window of time, again, it goes back to comments that, my fellow panelists and I made, and that is, time is of the essence. And it's your risk tolerance in the organization. Can you afford the time needed to go and haggle the price down, to find a lawyer, to find a PR firm that has the right experience to deal with all these right pieces at the 11th hour? A very quick example, and I'm not going to say a name, and that is 4 fairly well-known law firms were all hit this past weekend, just before midnight on Friday before a long weekend. And so you think about it, assuming you probably don't know until the next day in the morning, how much time do you have to react and to do stuff? And in a business like that, where you can think about the sensitivity of that information and the criticality of access to it, the bills add up pretty fast. So is $500 an hour that big a deal in the grand scheme of things? So something to keep in mind. And I think often companies I talk to are, as Guillaume pointed out, they fixate on what that rate is, and they say, oh my God, how can anyone pay that? And it's not extortion. So understand, like a lot of the things Guillaume outlined, that's very true. There's a lot of money, and some of those firms actually are also using these so-called guys that wear both black and white hats, if you know what I mean. And so they're often having to pay some of these guys off to the side saying, hey, I know you hack people normally, but would you come and help us with this incident if you're not involved? Yeah, it's a messy industry, right? I mean, there's things like this that go on out there, and you want the right people at the table to minimize the time it takes for you to recover and get out of this and get back to your business. That's the key.
Great, thanks, Epsit. And we got a couple other people for questions. So I'm going to go Brenda, Nancy, and then Paul. So Brenda, feel free.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a prologue, let's say. We've heard very much from this panel, about great insight on the risk and how when you have an incident that occurs, time is of the essence. And while we've talked about coming up with an incident response plan, I still see an opportunity for being more proactive and less reactive, such as vulnerability assessments. Now, while we've also touched on the fact that a lot of cybersecurity insurers have an approved vendors list, I took that to be in the context of once you have an incident, is there guidance from cyber insurance company on approved vendors to take a more proactive approach, say with doing assessments of your vulnerabilities?
I can take that, Brenda, for sure. So very good point, actually. Yes, we did emphasize a lot on the incident response and what would you do if something like this happened to you, right? But I'll go back to, I think, the very initial opening comment that I had about the preparedness. If you recall, we talked about knowing your IT assets, knowing your data. That is all. Let me actually summarize that in defense in depth. So I'm a big proponent of defense in depth, meaning you are going to have defense in multiple layers, starting from employee awareness. We talked about that. My colleagues just alluded to that. We're going to be having that asset management properly done. In order for us to continue doing the monitoring, in order for us to continue doing the vulnerability management, yes, absolutely, these are all the different layers of your defense, from the human side to the technology to identification of vulnerabilities and patching and all that, which is absolutely required. If you leave that part, then you are going to be dealing with incidents every day. So we are trying to definitely minimize the impact and the possibility and likelihood of you getting impacted. But now during the discussion, yes, I agree. We paid more attention to the after the incident and reactive part of it, which is also very important. So I believe going back to your question, whether or not the insurance providers can provide a list of service providers that can help you with being proactive, I believe some of them do, yes. If they don't necessarily do that, you can certainly ask, and they can probably also point you to the right direction. But if they don't, there's going to be also plenty of different providers, either your managed service provider from IT side or managed security service providers or consultants that can come in and do that proactive check up and help, essentially. That includes everything from the governance perspective, building your cybersecurity program, having policies and procedures, all the way to performing proactive penetration testing and red team exercises and all that.
Yes. And to add to that, I think you're absolutely right that we spent a whole lot more time on the what do you do once you've been hit. There are lots of aspects that you can do in prevention, right? So some of them are very technical, right? So security hygiene, stop executables from being allowed through mail and web browsing for the regular user population, as an example, right? So that's configuration of your web proxy and your mail gateway. You'll want to have software restriction policies from Microsoft running so that users cannot execute executables from their desktop and their My Documents folder and so forth, right? There's a lot of things like that you can do. Other than this, preventatively, you should most likely call into a security advisory service on security testing to go and do a ransomware defense assessment, right? So a group of hackers that basically will act as if they were a ransomware threat actor, trying to use the most commonly used threat methods, then using some of your infrastructure to see how well they could encrypt it, make a recommendation as to how you can better manage your accesses and all of these things. There's a lot to be done. So in that sense, I think it makes a lot of sense to go and bring experts at the table to ask them, how can you build an end-to-end ransomware program, right? Because there are all of the contracting aspects that we've discussed. There are all the technical prevention aspects. There's the resiliency aspect. And then there's everything that you need to do once that happens, right? If there's one thing I think everyone should get out of this meeting today is that ransomware is a conceptually simple problem that is incredibly complex to deal with because of its ramification for business, because of the depth of knowledge that is required to deal with it on the cybersecurity front, the resiliency front, and the IT front. It's very complex.
Great, thanks, Guillaume.
And if I could add just a couple quick things to that, so as an example, there are companies out there that can come in and, as my colleagues said, do those assessments and help you build out some of those aspects. I do know some of the insurance companies also suggest that you get one of these health checks or security reviews done as a condition or as a pre-step to actually qualifying for cybersecurity insurance. They want to know what they're getting into. It's no different than them for your home insurance or your building insurance. They send out an adjuster inspector to look. What are they taking on? What are they dealing with? And the cost of doing that may actually be beneficial to your organization because it could help you negotiate a more favorable rate if you're able to demonstrate that as an organization, you have taken a lot of smart preventative steps, which should reduce the risk of you being attacked, but more importantly, reduce the potential loss in the event of attack, because you have figured out and sorted out a lot of the things which will lead to a faster recovery. So things to keep in mind in terms of how you can take advantage of that. And as an example, I know that my organization, through our partners, we have some arrangements with customers where we go in and we actually do the attack. And then we go back and meet with the IT and the senior manager that was, sort of sponsoring that. And we talk about what was the result. Where did we get in? What happened? Who fell victim to it? Not that we're trying to out a certain individual in the company, but, for illustrative purposes, we could say, well, Brenda's the one that clicked on the link. And that was, patient zero. And then this is what happened that gave us access to this, that, and the other thing. And so it's like the fire drill that I talked about earlier. Not everyone has the ability, time, and capacity to do it. But again, look at your risk tolerance. How well does this play into your preparedness and resiliency as an organization?
Great, thanks, Epsit. And we're just running short on time, but I'd love to give Nancy and Paul a chance to ask their questions. So Nancy, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, panel. I mean, this is such a rich discussion and conversation. We can pick on many of the subjects and then go on for quite a while there. So maybe if I could just ask a bit about two subjects, one of which would be governance. So we talked a bit about the board's involvement, talked about the fact that management, CEO, president, whatever title, needs to really take the issue at hand and deal with it. Is that interaction in between? What would be the most productive kind of conversation to have between senior management and the board? We talk about risk tolerance. So, I think if you look at the boards out there, generally speaking, I think, we're getting to the point that most might have somebody who's tech savvy, but it would be very few that are knowledgeable about cybersecurity. So needing to take that into consideration, you can't get into, talking about the blue team, the red team, and all of that techie stuff. So what is a meaningful conversation that can be had between senior management and the board? So one point on that. The other one, I think it's third parties. So the third party could actually come at it different ways. I mean, it could be a vulnerability. Through a third party, you might get exposed. Either you have data out there or in their communication with you, it get intercepted or something, right? But it can also be the other way, in which case that you're exposing a third party because you got compromised. And there would be legal liability. There could be legal liability there, which is, quite important as well. So a couple of thoughts on those, if I may. Thank you.
Yeah, on the board governance piece, Nancy, I mean, I agree, and a lot of our attendees who come from small and mid-sized organizations, you know, I would dare to say that they may not have sophisticated parties at the board table, but still people who have an active interest in the company and are there for a reason. I would suggest that you're looking at this no differently than any other disaster in an organization. You just need to have that conversation. I mean, I'll just make up an example, but I mean, if the building was accidentally destroyed, that is your only location that you operate out of, right? I mean, what kind of a conversation would take place at the board level and senior management in terms of, okay, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to deal with this? How do we recover from it? Do we have another site to go to? Do we have this? Do we have that? I mean, the level of detail wouldn't be that different. This is just another one of those circumstances that you want to flush out and have a conversation with, so that you're not scrambling at the last minute about what the board wants to be actively involved in and what they don't. But more importantly, it may also flush out for you where the gaps are between board understanding and knowledge, management's understanding and knowledge. And that may actually also help you identify the types of partners that you want to bring to the table. And then just very quickly on your second point, I think we touched on that earlier too, about what I sort of call island hopping, you know, through your supply chain. And you just, that's part of your PR campaign and your communications with your customers and your vendors, because you may be having exposed customer data, your employee data, your vendor data. You don't know what, and unless you can understand very quickly what got exposed, copied, changed, etc., it's hard for you to respond accordingly. Do you want to just go and warn everybody you deal with? Maybe not, but you may need to, depending on the nature of your business. So it's the kinds of things that you want to talk through the scenarios. And by doing that, you'll have a better understanding of what do we do if the fire drill.
And so back to the board discussion really quickly. Like I think in most cases, the board needs to be educated. And at this point in time, I think for most industries, it is trivial to find examples of your peers that got it. Right. So I would go and give them real life examples so that they understand that the threat is real. So that's number one. Second thing I go and tell them is, listen, this is our level of preparedness. At the moment where we're talking, we do not have, as an example, a clear grasp of the monetary impact if this was to hit us, or we haven't run necessarily a tabletop, and we're looking for budgets or we're looking for support in order to run some of those activities, right? You want to make sure that they understand that this is a priority, right? So I would probably have a very transparent discussion, because if you don't, when this hits, it's a diminutive return, to say the least.
Great, thanks, Guillaume. And I'd love to give the last question to Paul.
Thanks, Brad. You guys may have touched on this just briefly before, but I was kind of just looking for, you know, a practical method of calculating, you know, the limit or the amount of coverage that you should have in place for cyber.
I can start. This is something that actually has been brought up many times in many of my discussions before. I believe the amount of cyber insurance, I mean, the discussion really about signing up and, you know, underwriting the insurance policy is something that needs to be done with the insurance. But in terms of your risk tolerance, I would treat this issue, the ransomware issue, and, you know, how much you want to have for cyber insurance, exactly the same as how you deal with any other type of insurance. You know, if there is that method of calculation that you have, it essentially is about identifying what data you have, identifying how much money you're probably going to lose on the stuff that Epsit talked about at the beginning, all the man hours or employee hours that goes into not being able to work, the hours that goes into spending time on recovering from the incident, the amount of potential loss during to you know, paying the consultants like us coming in and, you know, doing the work for you. It could, as we just talked about it could go up very rapidly. And also the amount of money that the attackers are going to ask, as well as lastly, potential penalties from the regulators. So if you add up that, there's a whole lot that goes into the intangible cost, your reputation and all that, for sure. I mean, that's the same type of calculation that happens for any other type of risk. But I would add, specifically for cybersecurity and insurance and ransomware type attacks, I would add these items that I just talked about and do a calculation of how much we can afford to lose. Again, as if it's any type of other risk. Now, in terms of how that number translates into the insurance coverage, I can't unfortunately provide a lot of insight. I'm not on the insurance side, but that is how you would calculate your threshold and your tolerance.
And another thing to say, so I think it's, and I smile whenever I hear that question, because it's probably the most difficult question to answer, right? Because there's not a clear-cut answer that's going to fit every business. If you look at most cybersecurity risk method, they're qualitative in nature, right? So high, medium, low, 1 to 10, red, green, yellow, right? So they're not necessarily meant to give you dollar amount values to quantify your risk. I think there is one exception to that rule right now as far as methodology, and it's FAIR, the Fair Risk Evaluation methodology. The challenge with FAIR is it's incredibly difficult to apply to real world situation. But if you are serious about establishing a dollar amount to your risk posture as it relates to the specific threat, then there might be an opportunity to leverage a consulting firm that will come and do a fair risk assessment on your company as it relates to that specific risk.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that, Paul, is that think about what you can afford in terms of the exposure. What's the insurance company really underwriting? So there's a whole bunch of things that Syed and Guillaume touched on in terms of the cost that you're going to be hit with. So the reality is that's what the insurance company is going to have to cover. And so if you go through the math and you add it up and say, okay, if we're going to be out for 20 days, assume, right, our downtime cost is $2 million. It's going to cost us $1 million for law firms and PR firms to help us manage through this. It's going to cost us this much with the auditors, and we're going to have to pay this much for restoration through one of these IT services companies, like what one of the three of us is involved in sometimes. And so there right away, you know that, okay, well, I'm looking at potentially $4 million in costs. So when you go and shop for insurance, you don't want the lowest rate because you don't know whether they're just covering the first $250,000. But of course, then you're going to overlay your probabilities. And as Syed said, we're not insurance experts. So I would have just the open and honest discussion with providers that you're engaged with or are interested in being engaged with. But in advance of that conversation, you should have a good understanding of what's your situation, what are you dealing with, what are your exposures, what are those other types of big costs like the ones that we just listed. So you know going in, am I talking about a $200,000 coverage policy or a $25 million coverage policy?
Great, thanks everyone. It's been definitely an active conversation, and I know we could probably do a fantastic follow-up with this in the future, probably at our conference or other sessions like this. Really want to thank Epsit, Syed, Guillaume, and John for participating and sharing their information. Ransomware has changed. The attacks have changed. It's been great to see how that process and get to understand how that process has changed. And knowing that, you got to figure out how you're going to prepare, how you're going to actually identify when the attacks have happened, assessing the impact and how much exposure you've got, and then figuring out how to contain and follow up on the attack and what the impact is going to be to your business to get yourself back up and running. So fabulous to have everybody there. I think there's going to be some follow-up. I know Epsit has a prize that he's going to share in the follow-up for all the attendees. So we'll send that out in the emails following. But thank you for sticking with us. I know we're over time, so really appreciate your attention to that. And I'll pass it back to Georgina.
Wow. Thank you, Brad. That was fantastic. Huge thank you to our moderator, our panelists, for what was a fascinating discussion. Reflecting on the last few days, we had a lot of business intelligence for our attendees, our members to take back. A tremendous thank you to all our volunteers who contribute day in and day out. A tremendous thank you to our team, our staff, Brad, Rita, Pat, Thomas, and all our chapters. I want to send a huge thank you to all of our 2021 Symposium Part 1 attendees, our speakers, our sponsors, to all of our committee members, and for volunteering their time to help put together the symposium and the education and business intelligence collectively and collaboratively. To FEI Canada's NSPs for their support and commitment and work alongside of FEI of the organization, and FEI Canada National for helping put things together. We couldn't do that without our staff. We hope all of you found the sessions enjoyable, engaging, and you went away with some fantastic knowledge that can be beneficial to both yourself and your organization you represent. This symposium was only part 1 of a 3-part journey. Our second part, if you can join us in February, please mark your calendars, February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So please mark your calendar for February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for part 2. For captivating sessions from industry leading speakers. Please keep your eyes peeled for more information that's going to be coming out very shortly. As well, please note in June, we're working towards our conference in Banff in Alberta. And that's coming up around the corner too, with the last 2 conferences being held virtually. We're delighted to announce that, of course, we hope and obviously expect that 22 conference to be back fully in person. Details on speakers, sessions, and everything else related to 2022 is going to be released shortly. So please don't wait too long. You should sponsor and you should also participate. So please give us a call. There's going to be a short survey that's going to be sent to your inboxes very shortly. So please take a few moments to complete this survey. Your feedback is essential in assisting with FEI Canada's quality thought leadership and online event experience. All responses are rigorously recorded. If you have any comments or queries or suggestions on what we can be doing, please don't hesitate to call me or contact me at gblanas, GBLANAS at feicanada.org. I look forward to connecting with you all. All the best. Stay safe, be well, take care, and looking forward to seeing you again.